Welcome to the City Futures Research Centre seminar series. I'd like to acknowledge we're meeting today on the traditional land of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation and would like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, as well as any First Nations people joining us today. If you are joining online, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera during the presentation. Once we get to the Q&A, you're welcome to turn your cameras back on and unmute yourself. You can also put questions into the chat and we will be monitoring the chat for questions. Today we will hear from Dr. Maryam Bostanara and Dr. Lee Roberts, who will present Are We There Yet? Modelling National Cycling Patterns to Reveal Australia's Policy Implementation Gap. Dr. Maryam Bostanara is a Research Associate at the City Futures Research Centre, specialising in the application of advanced econometric models and machine learning algorithms to active transport research, particularly cycling and the complex relationships between transport, land use and human behaviour. She holds a PhD in transport engineering and a BSc and MSc in industrial engineering systems optimisation. Maryam's research focuses on how individuals and households make both short-term and long-term travel decisions, and she is passionate about developing modelling approaches that can emulate human decision-making processes. Dr. Lee Roberts is a postdoctoral research associate at the City Futures Research Centre. Lee is an urban planner and designer with more than 10 years of experience across all phases of planning, design and construction, including urban planning frameworks and policy, public consultation, design documentation and construction administration. He holds a master's degree in architecture and urban planning and a PhD in urban design. Please welcome Maryam and Lee.
Thanks, Georgia. So I'm joining remotely, but I'm gonna start us off, and then Maryam and I are going to sort of tag team today. So I'm going to talk a little bit broadly about the context of the project that we're going to focus on for today. And then Maryam will kind of drill down into some of the details of the modeling and the results of our work so far. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's good to see you all, at least virtually, and let's get started. So first, next one, Maryam. So first, just a little bit about our group. We're a pretty small group within City Futures. There are really four of us. Chris Pettit, the director, is part of it, and Mike Harris is sort of our program lead, and then Maryam and I are both postdoc researchers, as Georgia said. So Georgia's introduction sort of captured a little bit of our interdisciplinarity within our group. We cover data science to engineering to urban design across the four of us. And so we bring a lot of different perspectives to our work. And really what we're interested in is understanding how people move around cities. Do they do that by car, by bus, by train, by bike, or on foot? And to understand what the impact of those different choices of mode are on our environments and our economics and our personal and societal health and well-being. We try to bring robust data and robust research to our work, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges of certainly the data side of it in active transport. That was a big kind of driver of this project. One of the great things about what we do as a group, and actually it's true for City Futures as a whole, is that we do all of our work in collaboration with other groups, whether that's local and state governments or communities and activists and advocates and practitioners, and that's really a great joy of what we do at City Futures. Our goal in sustainable mobility is to guide or help guide policy and governance decisions and delivery models with the goal of driving better understanding of active transport as a mode of getting around our cities, and to encourage more people to walk, ride, and take public transport. Next. So just for a little context setting, I'm going to run through, hopefully really quickly, some of our other projects and publications over the last couple of years that sort of feed into our current project. So next. So I know Mike Harris, when he gave his seminar a month or so ago, talked about this project, so I won't talk about it very much, but we worked with our city in civil engineering at UNSW to do a bike simulator project where we invited people who identified as interested in cycling but concerned about safety. We invited them in to test ride some virtual bike infrastructure to get their feedback on what they were comfortable with, but also to look at how they actually behaved in different types of infrastructure conditions. And the goal here was to inform Transport for New South Wales in their design guidelines for active transport infrastructure. Next.
It takes a few seconds.
Sure. Okay. We also, part of that same sort of decision support for transport and for other agencies, we looked at what the per kilometer benefits were of how much we walk and ride. So we looked at a whole range of things, health, social, environmental, economic benefits of active transport, and then quantified it in this dashboard that allows a user to say, well, if what if we increased cycling by 10% or increased walking by 20%? What would be the kind of bottom line economic benefit of that? And so we'll build that into a dashboard. Next. There's also a paper associated with that. Another thing that we do a lot of work on is neighborhood perceptions of cycleways. We're really interested in understanding how cycleways change streets and change the experience of cities, not just for cyclists, but for other road users as well. So we've done a lot of work with the City of Sydney on kind of pre and post construction of cycleways, looking at how perceptions change and get results, really kind of hopeful and encouraging results, like the second bullet here, where Burke Street after construction, if we interviewed all the residents along the street, not just cyclists, but everybody, and almost everybody agrees that the cycleway made the street better. And that's a great result that really is helpful in implementing cycleways. We've done some papers around similar work with that, and we've got some ongoing work with the City of Sydney on that. A current project that Maryam is very involved in is an NHMRC funded project called Building Capacity for Sustainable Transport. So there we're looking at, what do we need to do to get cycleways that work for all users, so all ages and abilities. How do we get not just the young and strong and fearless cyclists out on the streets, but everywhere else as well? What else can we do in terms of interventions or other changes in the built environment to make these changes? And part of this work, actually we'll go to the next one, part of that project and also part of some previous work was looking at bikeability to school. The NHMRC project will interview parents about what is important to them to allow their kids to ride to school. But we also looked at, how for teens, what are their barriers and incentives to riding bicycles, not just for school commute, but also for recreation, which we know is a big part of how we cycle in Australia. So paper that came out of that. And next one. And kind of a final paper that's actually sort of related to the work that we'll talk about, the project we'll talk about it in a minute. One of the challenges in modeling and understanding cycling behavior is that, we typically, even within City Futures, we typically focus on utility transport, utility cycling. So cycling trips for commuting to work or commuting to school or to run errands, or, those sorts of kind of transport trips that replace car trips, which are, of course, very important. But one of the things that's really important, especially in a place like Australia that doesn't have a huge number of cyclists, is that recreational cycling makes up the the vast majority of our cycling trips. And so we need to be able to accurately model and understand recreational trips as well. And so this paper, which Maryam led, but based on other work, was looking at, do we have models today, but kind of what's the state of the art in terms of modeling for cycling, and does it accurately capture recreational trips as well? Excuse me. Okay, so now I want to turn to our current project. Well, that's just about to end. We've got about another a month or so on this project, but it's about to go public in a couple of weeks. And that's the National Cycling Data and Analytics Platform, or NCDAP. And really, this project started out of frustration. When we're trying to understand how people cycle, or why people cycle, or why they don't cycle, we need good data on cycling attitudes and behaviors. And the reality is in Australia, well, actually it's true around the world, but definitely in Australia, cycling data is very hard to come by. There isn't very much of it. It tends to be very project specific, so it's very limited in scope to a particular city or even a particular street. And even that data that is out there is hard to access. Some of it is, buried in research projects. A lot of it is generated by private companies, and it's hard to get access to that, or it's expensive to access. But even when we look at the data that is available to us as researchers, or as practitioners, or as advocates, the data that we have doesn't really help us understand cycling attitudes, and it doesn't really help us predict cycling behaviors. And these are big issues. The number one burning question that people ask of us as researchers and of practitioners when they're designing projects is, how many people are going to use a cycleway if we build it? If we build painted cycleway versus a protected cycleway, what's the impact of that? And we really don't have the data and the tools to make those kind of predictions. So that's part of what the aim is of NCDAP, is to address these two frustrations. This is not just our set of frustrations at City Futures. Really, as I said, it's a national or international issue, and so the project that we're going to talk about today is really driven by a consortium of universities and organizations that are interested in understanding cycling better. It's funded by the ARC through what they call a LEAF grant, a Linkage Infrastructure Equipment and Facilities grant. So it's a big project with a lot of interested parties as part of it. The next slide is just a quick list of the CIs on the project. There were several from UNSW and then from universities across the country. And I think, I know Scott is here in the room today. So hi, Scott, thanks for coming. I'm not sure who else might be here from the CI group. So NCDAP really has three main components to it. And we'll talk about each one of them, well, briefly or in depth today. The first is it's a platform. This is an infrastructure grant. So the goal here was not to do research on its own, but to create infrastructure that was available to not just for us, but for other researchers. So the platform that we've created brings together existing cycling related data sets that come from a range of sources, from government data to data that's crowdsourced to data that we generated ourselves. And that data is then combined with a new national cycling attitudes and behaviors survey that we ran earlier this year. And those two things, although they're standalone products that are available through the portal or through the platform, are also contribute to decision and planning support tool that Maryam's going to talk about in depth in a minute. And I should say that, even though the current project, the current LEAF project, is kind of a standalone piece that we're just wrapping up. This project has already had a long life and will hopefully have a long life after the LEAF. We really started working on this back in 2019 with the original idea. We got an ARC grant in 2021 to build kind of a prototype of this tool that was just for Greater Sydney, and that project ran for a couple of years. And then the building capacity project, the NHMRC project that I mentioned, it's a much bigger and larger project, but it has a component about bikeability within it that we hope will eventually sort of feed into and contribute to the scenario builder tool, and then post this year, when the LEAF wraps up in a month or so, we have a future project with iMove and Transport for New South Wales to kind of continue developing and enhancing the tool. So we hope it has a long life going forward. Oops. So just to talk very briefly about it, one of the unique things, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but one of the unique things about NCDAP compared to the other projects and other research that we typically do is that it's designed to be very public facing. You know, the goal here is to not just collect this data and the survey and build the tool for ourselves, but to make these things public for other researchers and government organizations and other organizations and advocacy groups to use. So it's got a public-facing website, ncdap.org, which you can visit at your leisure. Within that website is the data portal for cycling related and other related data. Eventually, the cycling survey data will be posted to that site as well. And Maryam will talk about that data in a second. And the cycling infrastructure scenario builder tool will also be made available on that site. And our goal is to have that go live on December 16th. So please check the website then, and you can get access to the tool at that point. So just very briefly on the data set, on the data portal, it's a very typical CCAN type portal, so it's very easy to use, and you can ping it with APIs and things like that. We've got about 78 data sets in there at the moment, but the goal is that as we go forward and as we start publicizing this platform more broadly, that we get other contributions of data sets that go in here as well. Because what we know about cycling researchers is that, although we want to write our own papers and we want to do our own work, we're all really concerned with getting good data out there so that we can all work to make better infrastructure and to encourage more people to cycle. So our hope is that other researchers contribute their data to the platform as well. Okay, so I think this is the point where I'm going to hand over to Maryam to continue talking about the other two components of the platform.
Okay, thank you, Lee. So hello, everyone. My name is Maryam. I'm a research associate at City Futures. So very glad to present some of the work we have done in the past 1.5 years at City Futures around cycling. So as Lee mentioned, one of the big aspects of NCDAP was collecting a survey data from more than 13,000 people across cities of Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. So our target was to collect 3,000 from each city, but we ended up with much more than that. So the data itself is huge, and the data will be open access really soon. I will provide some introduction to different sections of it, and I want it to be a publicly available presentation out there for people to see what it includes and what it doesn't. So to start with, it covers some demographics and people's home and work locations. And then we also inquire about people who are unable to ride conventional bikes to understand whether there are any changes that could be made for them to be able to ride possibly a modified bike or something. And then we also cover information on people's current travel behavior and cycling behavior. Pretty straightforward topics like mode choice, purposes of different trips, mode choice for different distances, and then the frequency. And then we move into also some perception-related questions. As you know, cycling is very perception-driven. So we ask about different types of cyclists. They can self-assess themselves to the traffic stress, their level of traffic stress, their encouragement and discouragement factors, attitudes, safety measures, and if they are a driver, what are their attitudes towards cyclists while they're driving. So as you see, the survey data is really huge. I wouldn't be able to go into any details of any of them, but then I will try to provide a brief introduction to what we have. So after we got the data, we analyzed and modeled it, and it was a collective work of the whole teams from all the CIs in the project. But then we put everything into an analytic platform. So I will show the tool in one slide, but I want to just briefly say what the tool does actually. So the user logs in, and then they can see two different tabs. In the first tab, they can see the current conditions. So there are lots of GIS data layers they can explore on cycling infrastructure, accessibility, points of interest. And then the user might say, okay, it would have been great if we had this addition to the cycling infrastructure. So they are able to explore the map and find the road they want a cycleway to be added to. And then they will add that cycleway and see how many more people would cycle if that proposed new cycleway is built, and what is the economic impact of that. So here's the tool. So I wouldn't talk too much. You can just see what it includes. So we have a study area, which is the greater areas of Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, and Perth. And then these are the GIS data layers that I just talked about. So population density, job density, and then we can also see points of interest, whether there are parks, services, transit. And then we also brought in some external data. This one is a bike spot, which identifies positive and negative bicycle locations in a city. And then we have an interesting data layer, which is safe accessibility, mesh blocks with safe accessibility to schools. So basically, you can see the orange colored mesh blocks are the only mesh blocks that have safe cycleway route to schools, which, as you can see, is really, really scarce and interesting to see. So, and then we can see the existing cycling infrastructure and what type it is: separated, quiet way, shared, or painted. And then when you explore this new cycleway, you might figure out, okay, it's good to see to add a new cycleway. Then at that point, maybe I just keep this part under here. Okay, so if you find a location, let's say I'm working at UNSW, and let's say I'm a cyclist, and definitely you can see the slope of the road on the tool as well. But then you notice that in highway street, I don't know if that's feasible or not, but let's say you want to see if there is a potential in adding a cycleway in High Street, right outside UNSW campus. And then you will be able just to select this road, select the type of cycleway you want it to be. It could be painted, separated, or quiet way, and we will submit it to the model. And then on the background, the model and all the data analysis happens in the background, and you can see then the number of SA1s highlighted as blue that are affected by this new cycleway, and how many more people would potentially cycle as a result of this new proposed cycleway, and what would be the economic impact of this new infrastructure. So so before everything, I wanted to acknowledge this, the support of the software development team we had. So Alireza and Alex, specifically from UNSW, it was definitely impossible without their support. And then we had some software developers, assistance from QC, Josh, Chris, Daisy. I wanted to acknowledge their help as well here. So when we submit the changes to the tool, what happens in the background? In the background, we have a framework like this. We have some GIS data layers which provide our accessibility data. And then we have our survey data, which feeds into our behavioral model to understand who cycles and who doesn't. And then to be able to predict who would cycle as a result of a new cycleway, we need a synthetic population. If we had access to the actual population data, that would have been perfect, but typically we don't, so we generated a synthetic population, and then putting all these together, we can predict the cycling behavior, the cycling uptake as a result of a new infrastructure. So the question now is, what does the NCDAP data and model tell us up to here? So we have this huge survey data, we have been analyzing it, and the model, we have lots of models. What does it tell us? So it basically brings us to the title of this presentation. Are we there yet? Are we in Australia at a position at the moment to ask people to start cycling? Are we there to ask people to put your cars in the garage and start cycling as of tomorrow? Are we there yet or not? So there has been a huge work by the whole team. I just wanted to, other than me and Lee, and then we had our PhD student Suki, we had Zihua at Curtin, who provided lots of GIS work and then data analysis as well. And then Laya as well recently joined, helping us with some ICLV kind of models. So again, it's a huge work. I wouldn't be able to go over everything, but first of all, I will provide some descriptive analysis and then go over some of the results of the models. So first of all, we asked people about their mode share. So it's not a surprise. In Australia, people love vehicles, people love cars. So more than 90% of people used their cars in the last year to different extents and different frequencies. But bicycle also remained, although the use of bicycle is minimal, but it's still not that small. It's like more than 20% in all the cities. And the largest value we observed was in Perth, with 28% of people having cycled in the last year. So the second question we had was, do people really have access to a bike? Is it that we don't see that many people cycle, right? Is it related to ownership and access? If we give people bicycles, do we start cycling or not? So here you can see the results in this graph. So basically, we have categorized access into having access to a personal bike, a household bike, and to a shared bike. So interestingly, only less than 50% of people had access to a kind of a type of bike, with roughly 30% of them owning their own bike. But then, interestingly, more than 50, like roughly, or in some states, more than 50% of people didn't have access to any type of bike, even shared bikes, even household bikes. So the next question was, okay, if people have access, do they actually cycle or not? What we found out was that out of everyone that had access to a bicycle, more than 40% of them don't even use their bike, even once a year. So ownership does not really translate to using bicycles. But then the other 50-something% of people actually use their bicycle to different extents, but then only less than 10% of them use their bicycles on a daily basis. We also inquired about e-bikes. So e-bikes are getting popular. They resolve lots of issues with conventional bikes. What we found out was that if out of the number of people who actually ride a bicycle, that you can see in the gray bars, only 30% of people have access to an e-bike and have used an e-bike in the last year. And interestingly, the majority of people have chosen these 3 reasons for using an e-bike, which is e-bike helps them to ride for longer distances. It helps them to ride faster, and it helps them to be less tired after a cycling trip. So, and these 3, I don't think I would get to that point, but then these 3 are the biggest major issues that people identify when they talk about their barriers of cycling. So e-bikes could be a good potential. But then the question that I mentioned earlier, does it mean that if we provide more bicycles, people would cycle more? If we give everyone a single bicycle per household, let's say, is it that we solve the cycling uptake issue in Australia? So this is we first tried to model this, but then we noticed this is a self-selection bias. People who own a bike, it means that they like a bicycle. And when they like a bicycle, they will cycle no matter what, no matter if they have a bike or have access to a shared bike. So this is an interesting future direction that we didn't get to, but an interesting example is China, when they oversupplied they had a bike share system and they oversupplied, and then these are the number of bicycles that got dumped just because nobody used them. So it's not that easy. Then in our modeling framework, what we figured out was that cycling, I don't know how many times I have said it and how many times I will say it, cycling is very complicated and modeling cycling behavior is very, very complex. But something that we figured out, and I guess it is, and I'm pretty sure it is in the literature as well, that cycling for transport and cycling for recreation are 2 very different things. But both of them use roads and both of them use the transport network. So they are actually connected as well. So we tried to model them separately, but still we accounted for access perception on top of social demographics to understand who cycles and who doesn't, and what are the enablers and barriers. So we explored lots of machine learning models. Again, as the whole thing is quite complex, we explored many different algorithms, many different pipelines to see what works the best. So logistic regression models, support vector machine, random forest, and cat boost models, they all performed the best or better than the others. But then out of these, logistic regression took our eye, and then that was because of the biggest interpretability aspects of it. But then we also ran some chat analysis for interpretability. But what we, sorry about this moves around. It's okay. And then the key findings that we figured out of our first simple model was that, again, perceptions are #1 predictors. In cycle, people who are more confident, who have interest in cycling, and who have higher safety perceptions. And then, again, similar to the literature, people, male and young people cycle much more, and having access to more cycleways increases the cycling likelihood by a huge extent. But then, at this point, we were wondering another question. Does it mean that if we provide more cycleways, people would cycle more? If magically something happens to Sydney and a cycleway is added along every road in the city, does it mean that everybody starts cycling? So this brought us to this third project. So we wanted to know how much accessibility has impact on cycling. So in these maps, you can see distance to CBD on left. So the lighter the color, the closer to the CBD. So here is Sydney. This part is the CBD. And then on the right, we have the access to cycleways, right, for each of the 4 cities included. So as you can see, the closer we go to the CBD, the higher access to cycleways, but that's not really a linear relationship. There are other faraway areas that have a good length of cycleways accessible to people, but then we included these two inside our model. This time we explored another model which is called the mixed logit model. What I really like about mixed logit model is that it allows for heterogeneity across individuals. And it started from my own intuition. So I have lots of cycleways around where I'm living, but I don't cycle because I have a really bad memory of cycling because of an accident in the family. So it's not that people would cycle just because of the cycleways. So how can we measure that? So that's what we wanted to study here. So again, these would be a repeat of the previous model because they reiterate the previous findings. So again, positive perceptions were #1 predictors, and being a male and a young person means a higher chance of cycling, and the younger a person is, the higher chance of cycling. But then interestingly, what we found was that access to cycleways does really have a positive impact on cycling for transport, but it doesn't have a huge impact on cycling for recreation. And then in terms of accessing to CBD, the closer you are to the CBD, the higher the chance of cycling for transport and recreation, with Perth being an exception, which showed being closer to CBD actually means lower cycling for recreation, which is, I guess, intuitive. But why is it different to other cities? Interesting to know. But then what mixed logit helps us here is the heterogeneity across people's behavior in response to distance to CBD and cycling access. What we found out was that, yes, being closer to CBD is really important for uptake of cycling or the likelihood of cycling, but there is a high variation across people. It's not that people who live in CBD would, with no doubt, accept cycling. People have their own variations. And then again, related to cycleway access in terms of recreation, it doesn't mean that if you provide cycleways, people would start cycling for recreation. People have a high taste variation. And then it brings us to the final question of this presentation. So if it's not cycleways, what else it is? So to study that, we explored the other portions of the survey data we had. So I'm going into the perception aspects of the survey and the which I mentioned a lot, the most important predictors of cycling. But the first part is a 4 types of cycling typology, which goes back to Geller's definition. So just briefly, the way he defines it is that the population can be categorized into 4 main groups. People could be strong and fearless. These are people who would cycle no matter what, with cycleways, no cycleways. And then the second group is people who are enthusiastic and confident about cycling, but much less than the previous group. And then the third group are interested but concerned. This group are the hardest people to predict. These are people who love cycling, but then they are concerned. So what are the barriers? What are the enablers? This is an interesting point that lots of researchers are across at the moment. And then there is the fourth group that are no way, no how. No matter what you do, no matter how many cycleways you build, no matter how many bicycles you provide to them, they wouldn't cycle at all. So, and this is how the distribution is in our survey. So more or less pretty similar across the cities. But what we find out is that roughly 30%, more or less, in the States are no way, no how. So whatever you do, these people won't cycle at the current perception. And then we have this complex group of interested but concerned, which built up roughly 40 to 50% of the population. But then only less than, again, 9% of people would cycle no matter what, which is small, right? And then we wanted to know, out of people who are actually cycling, and out of people who have actually cycled in the last year, what typology do they belong to? So what we figured out is that only less than 2%, around 1% of people who are in the know where, know how group have cycled at least once in the last year. But then the majority of cyclists are out of these two most confident groups, strong and fearless, and enthusiastic and confident people. But then only 20% of them are out of interested but concerned. Again, a very interesting group to study. So I don't think I have much time to go over all the aspects of the perceptions, but we also covered a framework called Theory of Planned Behavior, where you ask people 9 specific questions, 3 questions on their interest in cycling, like I like cycling, I would rather cycling, I would rather cycle than drive, and then these are the first questions on interest, and then we have a number of questions on support, people who I know and who I like would support me to start cycling. Many of my family and friends use bicycle to go to work, and local events would encourage me to start cycling. And then we have the last 3 ones, which are around confidence. So I am a confident rider, and riding every day would be easy for me. Then again, I wouldn't be able to go into the details, but we did a bunch of study around that, how different typology cyclists are related to any of these groups. And then we also did some encouragement and discouragement factors. Again, I wouldn't be able to go into details, but we found out that health and having access to safe lanes were the top 2 main encouragements factors for people. And then what interesting point was that when we go above age 65, there is not much we can do to encourage people, which again is intuitive. But in terms of discouragements, whether is the number 1 barrier that people face, which we cannot do much about, I guess, other than increasing perceptions, because there are people in the Europe that cycle in any weather. But then the second thing that came up as discouraging factors was traffic stress, which we definitely can do something about, and then distance and having too much to carry, which are the barriers that could possibly be overcome to some extent with e-bikes. So again, I'm gonna move over the level of traffic stress. I don't think I have enough time to talk about this, but another very interesting aspect of this survey was to see what drivers think about cyclists. So as we have seen lots of drivers industries that are angry at cyclists because they don't think they are using the road the way it is designed to, maybe. But then interestingly, we benchmark this against people who actually cycle. So for example, if a person is a driver and also a cyclist, how does their perceptions change? And what we found out was that when people have negative attitudes towards cycling, they are definitely not a cyclist. But on the other hand, people who are a cyclist, they are very positive toward other cyclists. So when they have been a cyclist themselves, they agree that cyclists ride safe. Cyclists have a right of use of the road. So again, another interesting aspect to go into more details, which we haven't gone into it, is a future direction, but very, very interesting aspect. Now, so mentioned in the law, so perceptions are very important. So we need to bring in perceptions into our models. What are the best ways? So we explored structured equation models, and then integrated choice and latent variable model, ICLV models in short. I wouldn't have enough time to go into details, but then these are also some things that will come up as outputs of these projects. But going into what we are here on policy and practice, cycling is very, very hard to predict. It is really context dependent. It is perception driven. And it depends on many, many different things. Natural environment, built environment, infrastructure, purpose of cycling itself plays a big role, attitudes, distance to your destinations, and the perceived safety. But what we found out, and I want to mention as takeaway messages, is that the importance of having consistent data, which NCW was designed to fill the gap. And then the importance of longitudinal data. Whatever study we start with, it's either we have data before a new infrastructure change or after that. And then we don't know how the perceptions, how the take has changed from before and after. So very important to have longitudinal data around cycling, which happens up in other sides of the world. And then there is a strong demand for a tool like NCDAP tool, the tool that I just showed. And then, fortunately, Australia is still a starter cycling city, which hopefully will change in coming years. And then in terms of ownership and access, what we found out is that bicycle ownership does not really translate to cycling, but positive attitudes and higher perceived safety would. And e-bikes could potentially resolve some of the barriers to cycling. Cycling for recreation and transport are very, very different to model and study. And then moving on to the perceptions. Again, cycling is perception driven. If people like riding bikes, they will ride bikes. And cycling perceptions, interestingly, I didn't show the results, but they vary by location of people's residence. People who are living in CBD has higher perceptions towards cycling. It could be a self-selection bias or self-selection bias, but we haven't explored. But a good point is that cycling perception can be enhanced. Because cycling is directly related to perception, so why not working on campaigns that could enhance people's perceptions, which is something is happening in Sydney CBD. And then I guess these are my final slides. So these are the outputs that we have. We haven't, none of them are published yet. We are in the process of submitting 2 and then submitting the rest in the later months. But yeah, these are all that we are trying to put together in the coming months. And then, yeah, thank you for joining me and hope you enjoyed it. And I'm here for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
There's a question in the chat from Oliver. I'll ask it. It's more of a question for Maryam, so I'll read it. So, do you use positive feedback effects in your models? Critical mass thinking seems to have been instrumental in transforming London, and the critical mass movement was an important social movement in pushing the public view of cycling from an anecdotal point of view. So, is there a way to build that into our models?
Well, in the current model, we actually bring in some of the perception. The current model that is in the back end of the tool that I just showed, we use some of the perceptions true. But the main problem here is that when you can build a perfect model, but then in the population that you are predicting based on, you also need to predict people's perception, and that's the bottleneck. You can bring in people's perceptions into your models and they perform perfect, and then you can say, okay, people who have positive perceptions would cycle. But then what about the population? How do you predict who, for example, you that are sitting here, you are, I don't know, with your age, with your gender, and with your economic impact, can I predict your perception? So that's the bottleneck. We try to model that as, we try to bring in some sequential models to predict that beforehand, and that's working at the moment in the backend model. But then lots of ways. I guess we have a long way to go in terms of adding that to our models. Yeah, but
And Oliver, I'd just add that yeah, as Maryam said, we can sort of capture that critical mass effect in the theory of planned behavior data, where we looked at where we asked about, okay, do people that you know or like, do they cycle? You know, what's your attitude towards cycling in general? And we know that those factors are influenced by seeing other people cycle. So we certainly collected that data, at least sort of indirectly, but as Maryam has said, working that into the model is a challenge so far.
Chris? Yeah, please.
Just because it's in the news, e-bikes and the proposals to to restrict e-bike power and maybe even use amongst young people. Do you reckon that's a retrograde step, or actually might make perceptions of cycling safer and better, more positive?
You're saying the fat bikes can give you a bad vibe for cycling, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's true. We usually, I mean, I don't follow news, but I hear every week that something has happened because of an e-bike cycling somewhere that isn't safe or something. I guess that's, I mean, they work in parallel. It's not that, I mean, sometimes as a driver, I myself sometimes get angry at some cyclists that are not using the road the way they should do, in terms of like the speed, or sometimes there is a cycleway available, but they don't use it. And from the cyclist perspective, I have been a cyclist as well, so I see that cycleways are painted cycleways. I don't feel safe when someone's car door might just open all of a sudden. So I guess that's all together. If you want to enhance cycling, they all should come together, enhancing people's perception and building up campaigns for people to use bicycles and cycleways safer. And then all of those should come after building not a huge cycling infrastructure, which is connected, which is safe and separated. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, but I guess all of these should come together for us to be ready for a cycling city.
Just on that one though, because I think it's an interesting conversation at the moment around that, because you know, is it the bikes and the speed, or is that an outcome, like a perverse outcome, because we didn't have the good cycling infrastructure, so therefore for it to be safe for kids or anyone to be riding on the road, or they're picking those fat bikes that are going faster. So is it sort of like, you know, if we'd had good cycling infrastructure, would we have this outcome that we have now with these fat bikes becoming more popular? So I think you're saying, Maryam, the fact that we don't have good infrastructure, it's not well connected, there aren't hundreds of thousands of kilometres of it, like, you know, in European cities and so forth, that you're getting these perverse sort of impacts.
Probably also worth adding that most of the problems are actually from illegal e-bikes. They're not actually e-bikes. They're classified as motorbikes if it's not pedal assist. So that's a legal issue. And I guess then it comes down to an enforcement issue. It's a bit of a weird one because there's been so much attention to people getting fined for not having bells on their bike, but somehow recently these kind of illegal e-bikes are definitely being used and getting a lot of media attention when they crash. But they have just changed that import rule now back to what it was a few years ago, which aligns with the European standard of cutting out at 25 kilometres an hour, which that was always 25 hours. 25 kilometres an hour was always the cutoff, but the wattage is now back to 250. But also interesting, we're collecting data at Bondi Junction in the morning peak, and there was a few hundred bikes in the morning peak, and just over 50% were e-bikes, and not many of them were actually fat bikes. It was maybe 2 or 3. So it is clearly making up a huge portion of the bike mix now, and getting more people riding, particularly if it's in a hilly area.
Yeah, and infrastructure is a huge factor. I mean, the the big risk of somebody on an e-bike, well, on any bike, is, you know, mixing them either with car traffic or with pedestrian traffic, and neither of those is a good outcome, you know, and unfortunately, you know, it's the quick way to implement bike infrastructure is to just call a footpath a shared path, or to, you know, put a Shero on the street and say, you know, dust off your hands and say you're done with that. I loved Maryam's slide earlier about the, you know, some of the things, some of the bad infrastructure outcomes that, you know, that are out there. I think what's clear from this and from lots of other research is that, you know, dedicated bike infrastructure is a huge part of improving safety. And I think, you know, if your e-bike is on a dedicated lane and you're not mixing with car traffic or pedestrian traffic, you know, a lot of the pushback around e-bikes may go away, as well as some of the safety impacts. I know Fiona's in the room. She probably has could weigh in as well. Oops, except I noticed that we're at time, so I don't know if I don't know if Fiona, you want to jump in for a last comment on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with some of the comments, especially, yeah, that it's about illegal bikes and enforcement more than, and there is so much opportunity to increase cycling with e-bikes. It really is taking off. Just share bikes, and just in the city of Sydney, we now have 110,000 bike trips, share bike trips per week, 15,000 bike share trips per day just in our area. So it's really taking off. And I'm just posting a link there. You've been talking about attitude determining behaviour, but it's actually, there's research that shows that can be the opposite. Like once you get someone on a bike, you know, their friend convinces them to go on a Lime bike once, that's what changes their attitude.
That's great.
Thanks. Great presentation. Really interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. When you put your foot on other people's shoe, you just see the world out of their eyes. As a cyclist, I never understood the anger of drivers, and as a driver, sometimes I don't understand why cyclists behave the way they do. So, and then the point that if we put people on bicycle, they might change. It might change their perception. That's completely true. I can understand.
Maybe we need an empathy study in Australia. It's a bit more empathy for everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I would be happy to answer any questions through email or in the office. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Maryam and Lee. That concludes our seminar series for 2025. The seminar series will start back up on the 5th of Feb 2026. Research Fellow Dr. Charlie Gillen will present investigating the early adoption of AI-powered tools for development assessment in Australia. And the second presentation for next year will be on the 19th of February, which will feature Professor Emeritus John Landis visiting from the University of Pennsylvania. This session will be followed by a networking event, so keep an eye out for further details. And a quick reminder to join our mailing list just to keep up to date with any future events as well. Wishing you a happy and safe end to 2025.